Hello, I'm Glenn Mathewson with BuildingCodeCollege.com. Part of being a code educator is understanding code history, so I collect vintage building codes. But what I'm opening here isn't a code book. It's a newspaper, a very vintage newspaper. It's a newspaper from 1808, in the last year of the presidency of Thomas Jefferson, the third U.S. president. In this 200-year-old text, we see building regulations. Allow me to recite them to you. Whereas by the first article of the terms and conditions declared by the President of the United States on the 17th day of October 1791 for regulating the materials and manner of buildings and improvements on the lots in the city of Washington, it is provided that the outer and party walls of all houses in the said city shall be built of brick or stone. And by the third article of the same terms and conditions, it is declared that the wall of no house shall be higher than 40 feet to the roof in any part of the city, nor shall any be lower than 35 feet on any of the avenues. And whereas the above recited articles were found to impede the settlement in the city of mechanics and others whose circumstances did not admit of erecting houses authorized by the said regulations, for which cause the operation of the said articles having been suspended by several acts of the President from the 5th day of June, 1796, to this day, and beneficial effects arising from such suspension has been experienced, it is deemed proper to revive and continue the same, with the exceptions hereafter mentioned. Wherefore I, Thomas Jefferson, President of the United States, do declare that the first and third articles above shall be, and the same hereby are suspended until the first day of January in the year 1809, and that all houses which shall be erected in the city of Washington previous to the said first day of January in the year 1809, conformable in other respects to the regulations aforesaid, shall be considered as lawfully erected, except that no wooden house covering more than 320 square feet or higher than 12 feet from the sill to the eave shall be erected, nor shall any such house be placed within 24 feet of a brick or stone house. Given under my hand, the first day of January in the year 1808. Thomas Jefferson. So I typed out the text of this article so that it would be easier for you folks to read and for me to dissect, and we can make better sense of some of these run-on sentences and see how this article applies to construction today and the codes we see today. So let's start with this first block of text, and I want to point out right off the bat, this is from George Washington making this declaration on October 17th of 1791, and he is regulating the materials and manner of buildings and improvements in the city of Washington, which would later become Washington, D.C. October 17th, 1791 is before the Bill of Rights was ratified. We had building regulations before we had freedom of speech. Looking further into this, we see that Washington was regulating the outer and party walls of all houses, stating that they must be built of brick or stone. Now, in today's code, we would refer to that as non-combustible construction. And if we're looking at requirements for the outer walls of non-combustible construction, this sounds a lot to me like type of construction. And we would reference that in the today's IBC under section 602 for construction classifications. Any idea what type of construction has non-combustible outer walls? Well, that's type 3 with non-combustible exterior walls. And this might give us a little perspective and clue as to how the evolution of construction has been maintained to where we still recognize that type of construction today. It also refers to party walls, and this should be a familiar term for anyone in the code industry because it's still provided in the 2018 IRC here in section 706.11. Looking at the next block of text, we see that it refers to a third article. And so this clues me into the fact that George Washington must have made a larger declaration that had multiple articles related to building construction. We'll do more on that here at the end of this video. This third article stated that houses, even of brick or stone, could be no higher than 40 feet. Now, just for fun, let's go back to that 2018 IBC, to the allowable building height table, table 504.3. We'll look at R occupancies in non-sprinklered buildings. And notice under type 5 construction, which of course isn't brick or stone, but it is the type of construction that was still being built by folks during these times. And notice, interestingly enough, we have that 40 feet show up again. If we go to the next little part of this third article, it also provides that no house shall be lower than 35 feet on any of the avenues. And what that sounds like to me in modern terms is planning and zoning ordinances. My guess is that the avenues in the city had larger traffic amounts and more people utilizing them, and they wanted to keep the look of the city. They didn't want any little shanty houses less than 35 feet built on those main traffic pathways. Going to the next block of text, you can read that one. You may have to read it a few times, but what you're going to see is it basically says, well, a lot of mechanics didn't build to code. And I think that's a way of saying that not everyone could afford brick or stone. They had trees and mills available to get lumber, and they just went forward and kept on building their homes regardless of these regulations. In all my study of my other various vintage building codes, that seems to be a common theme during the 17, 18, and even early 1900s of trying to get folks to comply with this prohibition of wood framing, and it wasn't working. It wasn't working so much that we see right here on the 5th day of June 1796. This is 5 years after Washington made his declaration. Washington's coming out and saying, well, you know what? Based on the fact that all these mechanics have been building their houses without regard to the brick or stone requirement, I'm just going to go ahead and suspend these two acts right here, these two articles of the act. And he did this on the 5th day of June 1796. Now, I tried to find history or the actual proclamation from that exact day, and I was not successful. But what I did find was 1796 was an election year. It was the very end of the third term of George Washington's presidency. And so he's basically saying at the end of his presidency, he's just going to go ahead and suspend these. Now, when we look to the next block of text, we have to realize now we're hearing the voice from Thomas Jefferson and from 1808. As you see, the suspension in 1796, it says lasted to this day. So now we're in 1808, and it's being stated that, hey, you know what? The last, 16 years of this suspension, or the last, 12 years of this suspension, has actually not been a problem. People have been building with wood, and in fact, there's been some benefits that have arisen from it. So it's basically stating that suspending those rules hasn't caused any problems. So we go to the next whole paragraph in this news article, and here's where we get the new declarations from Thomas Jefferson being made in 1808. And what he's saying here is that these first and third articles, originally written by George Washington and then suspended by George Washington, Thomas Jefferson is saying they shall be. I'm not going to get rid of these. They are going to stay. However, I'm going to suspend them for one more year until the year 1809. Now, why would Thomas Jefferson come out and simply suspend these for one more year? It's so he didn't have to deal with it. Because in 1809, there would be a new president. And this issue of requiring brick and stone and the people, the Americans, not abiding by the rules would become James Madison's problem. Going to the next block of text, we get some other familiar language. where Thomas Jefferson is saying that he is going to continue to suspend this, and he's going to state that everything built up until this day of his new declaration is to be considered legal nonconforming. This is what we would call that today. However, there's going to be some exceptions to that legal nonconforming. That's the next block of text that says, I'll suspend this and allow these wooden houses, but they cannot be more than 320 square feet or 12 feet high. And then the very last part of his sort of exception to this suspension is that also these homes shall not be built within 24 feet of a brick or stone house. And that is what we see today in the code called fire separation distance. And it's very similar to this sentence where if an owner chooses to build out of wood or whatever material they're using out of, it's their responsibility for the proximity they build that to their property line. Just as this statement is saying, it's the responsibility of the person erecting a home out of wood to place it well away from other brick or stone houses. Before we end this video, let's go ahead and look at that date of George Washington's original Declaration on Construction, October 17th of 1791. This newspaper article only discussed 2 articles of this declaration. So I went online and I was able to find the declaration. The URL is at the top of the video, and I encourage you to go and explore this document on your own. But you can see here that this is October 17th, 1791, George Washington's Declaration. And going down the page, we see that first one spoke of in the newspaper article. Looks exactly like the article was speaking of. And just for fun, I wanted to show you guys this 4th article that's not provided in the newspaper that this is all based from. What does this 4th article say? We'll give it a read, because it basically says that before we had freedom of speech, we had building inspectors. My name is Glenn Mathewson, and this video has been provided to you by buildingcodecollege.com, where we go beyond the words.